What is going on, everybody? Welcome in to our next top 10 positional breakdown video for the 2024 NFL Draft. This is a much anticipated one. We're going to take a look at this cornerback class. Before we do get started, if you could do me a huge favor, take just a second to hit that like button. It really does help me out. Takes just a second. But beyond that, if you enjoy, do make sure you're subscribed. We are really in the home stretch here to reach 100,000 subscribers on this channel. It's been a huge goal of mine for really a year plus now. So if you could help me get that silver plaque, get 100,000 subscribers, but also make sure you don't miss any of my draft content, the rest of my positional breakdowns, the live draft stream here in a few weeks. I'd really appreciate you hitting that subscribe button to join us on this journey. But just a couple of quick notes before we get into my number 10 player here on this list. I think this cornerback class is really deep. I've written up 29 players on my draft guide over on my Patreon, and 21 of those 29 players that we've watched so far have fourth round grades or better. So inevitably there are going to be a lot of players that I don't talk about here in today's video that you want to know my thoughts and opinions on. You can get my full write-ups and grades and all of that over on my Patreon if you want to go check it out. You support my channel in the process as well. And we're going to be picking up 7-round mock drafts for all 32 teams. Some exclusive content over there. And then the other thing here is I love to show you guys the film on these players for these positional breakdown videos. Unfortunately, about half of the players on this list do come from the SEC conference that have made it very clear that they don't want YouTubers showing coaches' film on this platform. So you're going to see a little bit more of my face and a little bit less football film here in this video. Just wanted to preface that here. But without further ado, let's get into it with my number 10 ranked corner, which is actually going to be a two-way tie for my number 9 overall grade. But my 9B corner in this class is going to be Kamari Lasser out of Georgia. And I introduced Lasser with a very somber note because I just don't really know what to do with Lasser. I will start by saying I love his tape. He has some of the best technique. He's physical. He's quick. He's ultra smart. He's got good ball skills. He's instinctive. Really good football player. But, and he's got the biggest butt, B-U-T, of any corner in this list that we're going to talk about here. And it's a 4.65 40 that shows on tape. We knew he wasn't going to run fast. He comes out and he doesn't run fast. And the reality is speed at this position, especially if you're talking about a guy playing outside corner in the NFL, is critical. There's just not a long list or even a list at all of guys in the last few years or in the modern passing era really that have run this slow, come into the league as highly drafted guys and had a lot of success. And it's for the obvious reason of like not giving up the deep ball, preventing those explosive plays that NFL teams are obviously trying to avoid. And when you have a guy this slow, that's going to be a constant worry when he has to go outside and cover guys like Tyreek Hill in the NFL. But there's more to it than that. Why these guys that run slow just don't translate well at this position. Inevitably, as good as you were at the SEC, when you get to the NFL, you're going to lose a step here or a half a step there guarding these route runners, these athletes at the next level. A step and a half a step that you weren't necessarily losing in the college ranks. And when you start to trail behind, do you have that closing speed, the makeup speed to correct yourself and add to your coverage consistency? And it just, with Lasser, it's just not there. So you really have to start to get creative and say, how can we take the things he does well and find a role for him where he can exist as a starter in the league? And that's where it gets a lot harder, and ultimately why he might fall in the draft, because there's only going to be a select few teams that identify his skill set and say, we can turn that into a starter. The clearest pathway for me is going to be, honestly, similar to his Georgia predecessor, who I think is still running his 40 time at Georgia, despite declaring a couple years ago, Darion Kendrick, who I think ran in the 4.7s, if we're being serious here. he's actually been a decent starter for the Rams in one of those Fangio-style off-zone defenses where they're playing him 10 yards off and just using that natural cushion to protect his deep speed in a very natural sense. And I do think with Lassiter, like Kendrick, could be a starter in one of those systems where the corners are much more of an extension of the safety group, getting that extra cushion than they are these bump and run corners. But, obviously with a Darion Kendrick, it limits what you can do schematically. Eventually you're going to want to move off of that guy, as the Rams have done this offseason. Now, I do think Lassiter is much quicker, a more instinctive player, a more physical player, and a better player overall, but the limitations are similar there. But likewise, that scheme fit could work. The problem is, right now, most of the league is going away from that system that was kind of the meta 3 years ago. Most of these teams, like Green Bay, Minnesota, Cleveland, just to name a few, have gotten more back to that press man, single high type of defensive structure. So you're really only looking at like the Rams, maybe the Eagles with Fangio there, maybe in Arizona, being teams that would look at Kamari Lasser and say, you're a starting outside corner in our system. So for that reason, there just might not be enough teams that want to take him. He could fall for that reason. But I don't think that's the only way he can become a starter in the NFL. I do think as a slot corner where that long speed is naturally going to be protected, as long as you find a way to not keep him exposed on, deep crossing routes and slot fades. But man, Lassiter definitely has a slot corner's skill set. He's really frisky at the line. You can play him in press man from the slot. I do think so. Again, as long as you've got a safety, over the top to make sure he's got a little help there, but he'll jam you. He's got really quick feet and quick mental instincts to see that route break, respond quickly with his feet, and just stay in a dude's hip pocket. But really good zone eyes, can read the quarterback's eyes, can make a lot of plays in that short to intermediate part of the field. And he does have a good first step. He does have good acceleration in short areas. It's just that long speed that's a problem. So I do think as a slot corner, especially with his physicality and consistency as a run defender, that might be where he can be a starter in the league. But the last thing would be converting to safety, where I think he showed as an off-zone corner at Georgia, he's got excellent zone eyes, understands route combinations, has a good balance with his eyes and aggressiveness to be a playmaker without blowing his coverage. I think Lassiter could be a really good safety in a variety of different systems. So he's definitely a longer conversation, and will be a longer conversation in these draft rooms because you've got to really have a coach with the right game plan for how to use him. And even if he's not a starter, if he kind of busts out as a third or a fourth round pick, can't really be a consistent coverage player and be a starter for you, I think he could be an elite dime back. Think of like Mike Edwards or PJ Williams in recent years, where you get into that 6D back package, you put him in just kind of in the intermediate part of the field and say, go nuts, go be aggressive, go be a playmaker, use your instincts. If you bust a coverage, it's not going to destroy the integrity of the play because you have safety help over the top. So I think that could be kind of his floor. But at the end of the day, I'm very curious to see how high he gets drafted. Does a team believe that he can be a good corner despite the lack of long speed and take him in the second round? Or does he start to slip and become a value in the fourth or fifth round? He's a very polarizing player on this list, and I know a lot of people are going to have him higher than I do as well, even though I love his game. But let's get to my other 9th-ranked cornerback here, Kayn Carson out of Wake Forest. And I think Kayn has a little bit of sleeper potential in this draft, kind of depending where he goes, where the NFL views him, but certainly in the public eye, not someone that's being mentioned too much as a late second, early third round guy where I have him. And I think that's because of the injury, where honestly, cornerback might be the position where the pre-draft process allows these guys to help their stock the most. Number one, you get the opportunity to go to these showcase games where you're going up against the game's best prospects at wide receiver, press man coverage, one-on-one in an island. How do you look? All the eyes on you. But we already talked about the importance of that 40 time, getting that number on paper to really know how fast a guy truly is, to kind of lock that in. And with Kayn Carson, he has been recovering from an injury, really hasn't been able to participate in the pre-draft process much at all. And it adds some fog of war, if you will, to his evaluation. We didn't get a chance to confirm those workout numbers to see how he looked at the Senior Bowl. But it also, could be some hidden gem potential in there. Maybe he did go to the Senior Bowl and helped his stock, and maybe he did run a better 40 time than we were expecting, kind of like what happened with Quinan Mitchell. Now, I'm not saying he's as good of a player as Quinan Mitchell, but that might have been in the cards for Kayn Carson. So there's just a fascinating backstory there with where his draft stock is right now. But on the field, he has a very projectable skill set to the NFL as an outside corner. He has some of the best size in this class, which quietly has a lot of physical corners, but a lot of guys that are missing some of those thresholds, guys that are too light, their arm length is a little bit shorter than you'd think, or they're listed, just under 6 feet. Guys like Kamari Lasser, Rakestraw, Kool-Aid McKinney, all listed under 6 feet or measured in under 6 feet. Not Kayn Carson. He's a legit full-size 6 foot, good arm length, 200 pounds, full-sized NFL corner. But even if we didn't get those testing numbers, I do think he, unlike Lassiter, where you could tell on tape with Lassiter, like that speed was a concern and something Georgia themselves had to kind of game plan around, not Kayn Carson. Like, do I think he would have come out and run in the 4.3s? No, I probably not. Maybe. But I think very easy on tape, you can say 4.45, good NFL caliber speed. He's got easy hips relative to a bigger corner, accelerates well, good foot speed in and out of his transitions, just genuinely moves well and looks the part of a starting NFL corner. Just talking about his size, his athleticism, and the way he moves on film. Then you get to how he is in coverage, and he's a really fun watch. He's one of the more physical corners in this draft. Talked about how he models his game after J.C. Horn. You can really see that. He loves to get in guys' face at the line of scrimmage. Very physical down the field. It's a boon and a boondoggle for him. He can go toe-to-toe with some of the game's bigger wide receivers. He's not going to back down from a fight more often than not. He's going to subtly keep that hand in a guy's hip pocket, use it to slow guys down and stay tight in coverage. It's going to help him be physical at the catch point and contest passes and all that stuff. But at the same time, he's going to get flagged in the NFL, probably a lot more than he did in college. A lot of people like to slam guys for being over physical, but it is something a lot of good starters in the NFL generally do and get away with at the next level. Like Charvarius Ward, you could probably call holding on Charvarius Ward like 1 out of 4 plays, but they don't do that, right? Because that'd be annoying and refs would never do that. So it helps them be a more consistent, sticky coverage player. But you're going to live with some frustrating penalties, 3rd and 11s turning into first downs because he's holding on at 7 yards instead of 5. Like that kind of stuff is going to happen to Kayn Carson in the league. And I don't think he's going to really change his style either. So it is something you got to be comfortable with. I think a lot of teams are. Now, I do want to connect that point to my biggest weakness on Kayn Carson, and that is his general ball skills. And a lot of people see ball skills, they think interception numbers. It's a part of it. I want to see guys be able to convert interceptions. And Carson had some picks when, he was facing the quarterback, the ball was in front of him. But the biggest part of ball skills for me is really that poise in phase down the field on those deep targets. Do you have the confidence in your positioning to take your eyes and hands off of the receiver, get your head around, find the football, and make a play on the ball, whether that's an interception or a pass breakup? And with Carson, he doesn't really do that. He's going to stay physical early in the route and maintain that physicality all the way until the whistle blows. And if the receiver turns around to catch the ball, he might slap his arms away. He might push him in the chest. You're going to see a lot of deep pass interference calls on Kayn Carson as well, unless he can clean up that composure in phase and those ball skills down the field. So that's all something you got to live with. But again, overall, this is a starting NFL corner's profile. I also think something we haven't mentioned is he's very good in zone coverage. He did a little bit of everything at Wake Forest. I loved his anticipation and his ability to squeeze that space quickly from off coverage. He's a very physical run defender as well. Overall, I think you're talking about a late second, early third round corner who's going to come in and compete for a starting job right away. I think his floor is really good. My floor comp on him is Christian Fulton, who's had his ups and downs, but he's been a starting caliber corner in the league. My high-end comp is Chidobe Awuzie, who was a third-round pick for the Cowboys. Very similar physical profile, and I think a similar skill set as well, and a guy that kind of developed some of those ball skills and instincts throughout the years a little bit more. So potentially a sleeper in this class. I'm not the only one that has him around this range, but definitely a guy not a lot of people are talking about, and I think could surprise a little bit with how he looks in the league. But let's get to my 8th ranked corner, or in this case, tied for 7th, my 7B corner, Mike Sainristil, out of Michigan. And if you need a frisky, explosive, instinctive, experienced, physical slot corner that can start day one, Mike Sainristil's your guy. He is one of the easier evaluations in this class in terms of where he should play and how good he's going to play at the next level. But the thing I like the most about Sainristil, and why I'm comfortable taking him even if he's a slot corner, which typically you're talking about 3rd, 4th, 5th round picks for slot corners. The reason I'm comfortable with him in the 2nd round is he is really dynamic for a slot player. His short area explosiveness is elite for the position. He showed it off at the combine with a 1.51 10-yard split, which is some of the best in the class, but also a 40-inch vertical jump, a near 11-foot broad jump, a 6.99 3-cone, a 4.01 shuttle. Like, all of the short area metrics are incredible on Sainristil. And then you go to his tape, and you can see that juice when he accelerates in short areas. A lot of the highlights I'm showing you are him coming downhill, getting 4 or 5 steps, and just getting to that top speed immediately and blowing dudes up underneath. You can also see, like, when he triggers and is a little bit on the trail on like a corner route, he can close that space quickly and get out there to convert interceptions, which takes me to my other favorite trait of Mike Sainristil is just the ball skills and the instincts and the physicality. Like, he is that definition of a football player where he's going to convert interceptions. He's going to find a way to get his arm around the right angle and break up a pass. He can bend and contort in the run game. He oftentimes lined up at like a linebacker alignment at Michigan, where they demanded a lot from him. And that's where my K'Waun Williams comp comes in. More like Niners K'Waun Williams, who I pounded the table for in like 2021 at the time, was like the best corner in the NFL. K'Waun, like Mike Sainristil, even if he's listed really small, and K'Waun is very similar, like 5'9", 185, K'Waun would come in and really was the reason the Niners were able to live in nickel, because he could step in as like a weak side linebacker and take on tight ends and get involved in the line of scrimmage and just be a problem. I see the same thing with Mike Sainristil, but also underrated coverage instincts from K'Waun Williams. So to me, that is Mike Sainristil. Very high floor player on an easy projection. Now, some of his weaknesses, number one is, even though he plays above his size, he is a much smaller corner, 5'9", 182. Something to think about. I'm not too worried about it. But when it comes to his tape, there was one thing that I was a little underwhelmed with. I'm just being honest. It was that kind of stickiness in coverage. You know, while I liked his ability to kind of read the quarterback's eyes and the way he can accelerate and close space to make plays on the ball, if you want him to just stay on a guy off the snap and stay at his hip pocket, I did feel like his reactionary quickness and just kind of mirroring ability in short areas in coverage, He did give up a little more space than I kind of expected, given his sort of agility scores and all that stuff. I think it was more of a mental thing and a route processing thing than it was anything that's holding him back physically. So maybe that can get sped up and he can be a little bit more of a consistent cover player from the slot. But even if you're getting some of those losses on two-way goes against really good slot receivers, you're still going to get some playmaking in coverage when he can drop into those hook zones and curl flats where he's really good. So it's not enough to really hurt what is, for me, a really high floor projection as a capable slot player in the league. And, he can kind of step outside too. He did it at Michigan, but that's probably not where his best upside is unless you're putting him in kind of like we talked about with Lasseter, kind of into one of those more off-zone type of systems like a Darius Williams type of role. But I think most teams are going to see him as a slot and put him in the slot where I think he'll be at his best. And then we have my 7A ranked corner, and that's going to be Ennis Rakestraw Jr. out of Missouri. And this is a player, I try not to over-obsess about pro comps, but this is a player that I want to go straight to his pro comp because it is, to me, one of the cleanest comps to a recent player in the league that came out with a nearly identical prospect profile and was exactly the guy we thought he would be in the NFL, and that is Roger McCreary, who is a good starting corner, not a great starting corner for the Tennessee Titans, who does a lot of damage from the slot. And dude, Ennis Rakestraw is a spitting image of what McCreary was as a second-round pick for the Titans. Like, whether you want to pull up their RAS comparison, stack up the size, the athletic profile, all that, it's extremely close. Whether you want to go back to my draft analysis on him, where fourth-year player out of the SEC, 5'11", 190 pounds, second-round grade, overall grade of 6.25. I'm a tick higher on Rakestraw because he played a little bit more zone and is more comfortable out the gate in zone, where I thought McCreary had to learn some of that stuff. So there's a minor difference there. But in terms of when I draft him, the grading profile, the conference he played in, nearly identical. And then just, the overall play style, that's really where the pro comp started. I'm just watching this guy play some outside corner, play some slot corner, bump and run, man corner enthusiast, who's also not the biggest guy, not the fastest guy, not necessarily the athlete that you'd expect to be this great man corner, but because of his technique and his physicality and his competitiveness, he puts out a really good end result. It's eerie how similar these two guys are just 2 years apart. So that is a pro comp that I'm ready to go to like right away, and it makes me feel really good about Ennis Rakestraw. And even all the way down to like my biggest knock on him, which is like the ball skills, where he's almost a little bit too focused on reading a guy's feet and his hips, and not the best in terms of getting his head around, converting interceptions, finding the ball. Just one career interception. Like, you're not going to get a ton of dynamic, explosive highlight reel plays from Rakestraw, but again, just like McCreary, plug him in, day one starter. Don't really have to coach him up all that much because his technique and man is just foolproof. Super competitive dude, a good enough athlete, big enough as a player that the physical limitations aren't going to hold him back in the way that maybe like Kamari Lasseter's speed would. And I think he's a guy like McCreary that also has inside-out flexibility. It doesn't really matter if you need a slot corner, a field corner, a bound corner, whatever. Just like when the Titans took McCreary, they were like, well, we don't really know where you're going to play, but we know you're going to play. And that's exactly the way I feel about Ennis Rakestraw Jr. So sorry to obsess about a pro comp, but this one really is spot on. And ask any Titans fan, they'll tell you Roger McCreary is just a really solid player. I think that'll be Rakestraw at the next level. But then we go to my number 6 corner, and we're going to stay in the SEC here, but we are going to take a leap here with Andrew Phillips out of Kentucky, and a leap in terms of real potential, and I really hate to use the word shutdown corner potential in the modern NFL, because that guy just doesn't really exist outside of maybe Sauce Gardner. But legit number one corner, high-end coverage consistency type of modern shutdown potential. And you just need a certain physical, athletic profile to find that guy in the NFL. And none of the guys we've talked about really have that to this point. Andrew Phillips does. You know, the speed is good. It's not Jair Alexander if you're looking for kind of a shorter corner with unbelievable physical tools. It's not quite that, but it's good enough. Doesn't really show up as an issue unless he's really covering like 40 yards down the field or really deep bender. But beyond that, like the hips, the change of direction, the ability to accelerate in and out of his breaks, the rapid foot speed to mirror route breaks, it's all there with Andrew Phillips. But it's not just those athletic levers for Andrew Phillips, because there's 3 or 4 guys in this draft and in any draft class that will have the physical ability of an Andrew Phillips. But Phillips marries that with really good mental processing at the position, something we don't talk enough about for cornerbacks. But that's a big part of where you see that A- route squeeze grade that I give Andrew Phillips. This is a good opportunity to kind of talk about route squeeze and what it is as a trait that I evaluate for these guys. It's most specifically talking about guys in those kind of off-zone moments, which no matter what scheme you're in, eventually you're going to play some off-zone coverage, no matter where you are. But if a team's going to play you off, eventually you need to squeeze that space and do it efficiently, but without overcommitting and leaving yourself exposed to double moves as well. And that route squeeze obviously requires the fluid hips and the acceleration to turn and accelerate into that coverage, but you also have to anticipate what route is coming. And you have to gather that information, but also have that mental reaction time to paint the picture, but then communicate that picture to your body. And I can take out an elastic band to describe route squeeze. Like, you're going to end up with that space squeezed out. But for a corner, a good route squeeze is how quickly, when the receiver begins his break, can you take that space and let that space snap back into place and stay in place. And with Andrew Phillips, it's just something you notice with him that you don't see with a lot of corners in this draft. He's a sticky corner in that way. And he can absolutely play any sort of off-zone coverage. And then you see that same mental processing ability in his, man-to-man route mirroring ability. There's a little bit of that route squeeze element there as well, where when you're in a guy's hip pocket and he gives you that shoulder fake and he goes on that out route, how quickly do you process that you're getting an out route and stay tight to that coverage? It's all there at a really high level with Andrew Phillips. So man, zone, press, off, whatever you want to ask him to do, it's all there from a coverage perspective. He has some of the best coverage skills in this draft. Now, why I have a second round grade on him, why he's my 6th corner and not my number 1 corner, and why I don't have a Jair Alexander comp on him, is he does have some knocks. One of them is, we mentioned, like the long speed. For a more undersized corner here, it's not incredible. It's just good NFL starting caliber long speed. It's not like what you're getting from any of the undersized elite corners in the league, like a Jair Alexander. So there's that. But on top of that, that size does show up. He is a guy that projects better as an outside corner. And at 5'10", 5'11", 190, it's not bad size, but it's certainly lower than you typically see for an outside corner. And you will see him have to get matched up on some of these bigger corners where inevitably they will just out-physical him. They can kind of, some of these receivers like Mike Evans, Drake London, they're going to go to push-offs. And if you do a push-off on Andrew Phillips, he's going to get knocked back a little bit more than some of these other stronger corners. So that's a knock on him. In terms of coverage, there was one thing I noticed too. It's rare, but maybe 2-3 times a game, he would be either early or pick the wrong direction to open up with his hips, and it would just leave him in like compromising situations where his hips are turned, again, either too soon or in the wrong direction, and could lose a rep that way. So it's a correctable thing, but it's in there that kind of needs to be cleaned up. But the biggest knock on him is run defense, where he really is an abysmal run defender. He lacks play strength. I would say he plays lighter than his listed weight. Like, he's listed at 190, plays more like he's 175, honestly. So he doesn't really get off blocks or handle the physical elements of that part of the game. But especially as a tackler, it's a woof, man. Like, if he was a good tackler, we might be talking about a first-round corner here. But he missed like 1 out of 4 tackles at Kentucky. It's bad technique. It's a lack of like arm strength to wrap guys up. There's just problems there. And a lot of teams will be turned off of that. I know you don't draft a corner to tackle, but you can't have a guy missing 1 out of 4 tackles either. So there is some stuff to clean up with him. Again, it's why he's not like a lock first rounder or anything. But he is one of the higher upside corners in this draft and a really fun watch. I think has a chance to come into the league as a second-round pick and carve out a role as a potential number 1 corner, but certainly a good number 2 as well. And you can really put him into a large variety of systems as well and expect some good success. So consider myself an Andrew Phillips fan. I don't know too many people that are going to have him CB6, but let's get into my top 5. And this is where things get a little bit more chalky, and guys that you've heard a lot more of. But let's talk about Kool-Aid McKinney, my number 5 corner in this draft. Ultra solid, high floor cornerback prospect who just has some speed concerns. It's not quite on the Kamari Lasser level, but is a guy that, you're going to want to just be conscious of who he's going one-on-one against, because he can get stacked, and he did get stacked at Alabama, and there were times that I felt like if the opposing quarterback was looking his way, he could have had a much worse season, but because he's so locked down and has been locked down in his time at Alabama, teams started to just avoid him, and that was actually a mistake for a lot of teams because Teran Arnold was the guy they were targeting on the other side when, in fact, going deep on Kool-Aid might have been their best or their path of least resistance. So, that's something with Kool-Aid that dings him down a little bit. I think it does reduce his overall upside. But other than that, man, you're really searching to find weaknesses on Kool-Aid. And again, the long speed's not brutal like it is with Kamari Lasser. It's good enough. But again, if you're searching for some other weaknesses, maybe you would say he's not quite the biggest corner for a guy that projects as more of a press man corner. This isn't Joey Porter Jr. last year where he's 6'2". Kool-Aid's under 6 foot. But at the same time, Kool-Aid at just under 6 feet tall has really good arm length, 32 inches. And I would say that's actually one of his biggest strengths. One of the things you noticed with Kool-Aid was how good he is and how subtle he is with his arm usage. Because he is shorter, but he has these longer arms, they're an asset for him, and he'll just kind of float them / stick them on the guy he's covering. But he's not as violent with it or as out there with it as even like Joey Porter, who we mentioned, or Kayn Carson, who we were talking about earlier, where it's he's probably going to draw a flag for that. Kool-Aid just uses his arm length kind of as a guide and as a minor lever to subtly redirect guys and slow them down. And this is something actually that Xavier Howard used really well. This is I didn't go with Xavier Howard as my comp, but the skill that Kool-Aid has in this trait is very similar. Xavier Howard was another guy that I think had 4, 5, 6 speed, but really you didn't see Xavier Howard get beat deep too much because he was so subtle with those arms. When guys are trying to accelerate away from him, he'll just kind of leave that arm hanging out there, use it to slow you down, but also use it almost like draft in Mario Kart to just kind of ride the wave a little bit and help his speed. Kool-Aid is perfectly brilliant at that trait right there. And it's a big reason I'm not quite as worried about his long speed as well. But that's something that he weaponizes that I really like him, and I think gives him a really high floor. And they're not going to flag that too often because it's so subtle but meaningful in his game. But beyond that, super smart player. Like his zone coverage. Wouldn't say I love his zone coverage. He's still a young player. They had him playing a lot of press man, so he's still collecting reps in zone, but he's still a smart player. You didn't necessarily see like incredible playmaking instincts from zone or anything like that, but he did his job, didn't blow a lot of assignments. No real concerns there. His overall technique, we already mentioned some of it in man coverage, but his press technique and just his composure, his willingness to trust his technique, it's really a thing of beauty. That reminds me a lot of Pat Surtain coming out of Alabama, who honestly got underhyped in that draft class, which I think some of that's happening with Kool-Aid, because Surtain wasn't the most dynamic athlete, wasn't the most crazy playmaker, but was just so technically sound and consistent. That obviously translated to the league. I see a lot of the similarities with Kool-Aid in terms of how he's been coached. But a physical run defender, good mirroring ability, good reaction time in man coverage as well. Solid to good, like acceleration, agility, change of direction. It really is just that true long speed that's going to ding him. But he's become a little bit of a forgotten man in this draft class, and I think that's a mistake. I really think he's a first-round caliber corner prospect that is the fifth corner in this draft because of the lack of upside, and if that pushes him into the top of round 2, so be it. We've seen that with somehow Joey Porter last year, or my pro comp for Kool-Aid, Jalen Johnson. Damn good corner, just got a huge contract extension for the Bears. A lot of similarities there with Jalen Johnson. Are you drafting Kool-Aid expecting to get Marshawn Lattimore or Jalen Ramsey? No, you're not, but I think as a number 2 corner out the gate, you've got your guy in Kool-Aid, and I think he can be a low-end number 1 as well. But let's go to my next corner here, and we have one more tie in terms of the overall grade with my 3B ranked corner, and that's Cooper DeJean out of Iowa. And there's been a lot of conversation with Cooper DeJean in terms of, okay, white corner, stiffer hips. We don't have a 40 time yet. He's got it scheduled for April 15th. And I will just note, if he comes out and runs a 4.42 or better, I think I'd flip him to 3A. I think he'd run a little bit slower than that. I've got him estimated about 4.49, 4.5 flat. But either way, there's people saying, we haven't had a starting white corner in the league, 30 plus years? Cooper DeJean, obviously a safety. Honestly, I don't even know that it's so much because he's a white dude. I think it's more like, I actually do think Cooper DeJean might be a dominant safety in the NFL, just in terms of his movement skills, his size, the way he defends the run, and the areas of coverage that he's at his best. But I think that's his best position, but I think he can also be a quality starter as an outside corner, and then kind of for similar reasons that I like him at safety, I think he could be an elite slot corner in the NFL as well. So I'm not even going to totally push back on the idea that he might be a safety in the league, because if you need a safety, we're seeing the way the safety market is blowing up in the NFL right now. These guys are getting paid like corners. If you think there's value in putting him at that position, I'm not even really against it. But either way, the conversation on him is a little bit all over the place. So where do we want to start with him? Let's start with who he is as an outside corner. For me, if I'm taking Cooper DeJean to be an outside corner, it is to play at the line of scrimmage in one of these press jam heavy systems. And like Indianapolis at 15 is kind of the starting point with Cooper DeJean. Love that as a scheme fit, right? Like they want these classic Seattle 3 style corners. I see that in Cooper DeJean's skill set all the way through. Like his press ability, just pure press jam, is maybe he's got a lot of great traits, but it's one of his best traits is just he's got these rocked up arms with accurate punches and a ton of stopping power with great foot technique, just overall press technique. He is a great press corner prospect. And I think it's almost a requirement if you want to get high-end coverage ability out of him to tap into that, because when he's out in space, it's not that he's a bad athlete, it's just he's much more average in terms of the hip flexion, the ability to turn and run, the foot speed to really mirror man-to-man in space. It's fine, but if you take away the physicality aspect of him where he can start in your face and stay in your face throughout the play, he's just an average coverage player for an outside corner. So I definitely prefer him in one of these press style systems as opposed to one of these more Fangio off zone systems where he's, in space a lot more of an extension of your safety staff. Because at that point, it's like, I'd rather you just move him closer to the line of scrimmage as a slot corner or a safety, where I think you would get more out of his skill set. So I think if you want to run press man and cover 3, I think he's a very great prospect as an outside corner. If you want more quarters, off zone type of stuff, honestly, I'd probably go in a different direction than Cooper DeJean for an outside corner. But that's just the starting point for a way to use him. Honestly, my favorite role for him, I mentioned safety would be good for him, but I think my favorite role for him, if a team has this vision, is to play him as a starting big slot player. Very similar to how the Ravens use Kyle Hamilton, but a lot of ways that the Rams really started to use Jalen Ramsey. That's where my pro comp comes in, is diet Jalen Ramsey. I don't think he's quite the athlete and will have quite the coverage consistency that Jalen Ramsey had throughout his career. But in terms of his style, being a really good press man corner with great zone eyes, playmaking instincts, and an elite run defender, there's a lot of similarities in terms of usage with Cooper DeJean. And some of Jalen Ramsey's best games were as the star slot corner for the LA Rams, because you're getting a guy that has excellent coverage ability that can really match up against all of the variety of different players that position group's going to see. Tight ends, where Cooper DeJean can be locked down against. Slot receivers, he can handle big slots. He can handle even undersized slots pretty well. But that's just the coverage, right? You're putting him down there in the box where he can be a dominant presence against the run, where DeJean has the play strength and just menacing attitude to come down and play in the box, kind of like a linebacker at times. I think Cooper DeJean could put on weight and play linebacker if he really wanted to. But that, for all those similar reasons, I think the safety projection is totally fine. Really fun player overall, though. Just kind of your classic, he's just a football player type, take him and figure it out, you won't regret it type of prospect. I'm very much in line with that line of thinking. Before we move to my next prospect, I would be remiss if I didn't say there's one frustration in Cooper DeJean's tape that I think is coachable, but it did really annoy me for how smart of a zone player he is. You constantly see him looking around, making plays off of zone, communicating with his teammates, passing off zones, really high zone IQ, especially out of cover 3 that Iowa ran so much. I'm pulling my hair out asking why Cooper DeJean is leaving so much space underneath so consistently on curls, comebacks, out routes. It's like he's seeing it, but he's just making a conscious decision to not take that stuff away. So I had to ding his route squeeze for that, because that's kind of what we're talking about, where there's that space underneath. Are you able to squeeze it down and not allow unnecessary separation? A lot of that was on tape with Cooper DeJean. I think it's very coachable and might even be something Iowa was willing to live with to prevent big plays and just err on the side of caution. But in the NFL, I want my outside corner to take that stuff away. So one thing in his coverage that did bother me there that I want to see him get better at. But let's move on to my next guy. Right back to Alabama with Teran Arnold as my 3A corner in this draft. Same overall grade as DeJean. But Teran Arnold. And, man, there's a lot of places you could start with Teran Arnold. A lot of hype for this player, a big third year at Alabama. A lot of targets went his way because Kool-Aid was kind of the number one for Alabama. But, man, Arnold made the most of it with a bunch of picks, a bunch of highlight plays on the ball, and really showed off, I think, a higher upside than Kool-Aid. Real, like, incredible fluid athletic ability. Something we talked about with Andrew Phillips is absolutely there with Teran Arnold. Like, you just aren't going to find a lot of guys that can flip their hips, the oily transitions, the easy acceleration, the rapid foot speed, really that ability to just glide around the field and stay sticky in coverage. It's there with Teran Arnold. But at the same time, not quite as fast as Andrew Phillips, just behind him. I think on tape and in his 40 time, it all matches up. But, like, I would be remiss if I didn't at least bring this up as a point on Teran Arnold. Slight Jeff Okudah vibes, where everybody loves him, his production's great, he's got good man-to-man technique, big school, declaring as a junior, like, projected top draft pick, yet, ran a 4.5. That's not great for an NFL corner. It's fine, it's serviceable, but it does reduce that margin for error, and Jeff Okudah has not been worth that top 4 pick. So I'm not saying that's Teran Arnold's fate, but I wanted to see a little bit better. I wanted to see him at least in the 4.4s, and I didn't know that he would based on his tape. His long speed is it's fine. But again, that margin for error is a little bit reduced. Now, he has it in him to play at a high level with that reduced margin for error because of those short area athletic skills, but also because of his technique and his skill at the position. I love him man to man. Like, when he gets in a guy's hip pocket, not only is he super quick in his athleticism, but he sees route breaks and he responds to them like that. Like, his mirroring ability is fantastic. And I actually especially like him in the slot, where he can, like, I know we talk down on slot corners, but if you have a guy that can legitimately defend two-way goes against some of the best route runners in the league, where a guy's running at you and, he's running that option route, he could go left or right, and you don't really know, you just got to react. Those are lethal in the NFL, and Teran Arnold has legitimate potential to defend two-way goes from the slot in the way that not a lot of people do, because he has that quick reaction time in those areas. So you pair that with some of the lack of long speed and how good he is as a run defender, I actually think Arnold is a higher potential player in the slot in the league, at least as a partial slot player. So that's something to keep in mind. I also think his overall, like, zone IQ and that route squeeze, like the route anticipation, when he's off a little bit more, that's where I was a little bit more underwhelmed with Teran Arnold. Like, you talk about that route squeeze where you're starting off, you have to anticipate routes and close that space when that receiver declares that break like that. And with Arnold, it's a little hand in hand. Like, there's reps where with his acceleration, his hips, like, he can click and close and snap down on an out route with the best of them when he sees it. So I can't grade him out too poorly for route squeeze, but there are times where he's a little hesitant. He sees the guy declare and he's like, oh, should I go? Should I stay? Should I just leave 5 yards between me and him? And then before he can make a decision, that ball's out and being completed. So there were some ups and downs in terms of him from off-zone coverage. But when he is staying tight and that's his primary objective is just, this is my guy, I'm sticking with him, let's go, it's awesome tape. And he's got something not a lot of guys have, where he trusts his technique, he trusts his movement skills, where if the ball's in the air, he does have a rare ability to, again, just trust where he is, get that head around, find it, convert interceptions. he can be a playmaker in that way. So it's like he can play outside for that reason as well. Like he can really defend go balls as long as he's not getting burnt over the top by some of the game's burners at wide receiver. But love that from him. I do think his overall press coverage technique is still a work in progress, similar to his route squeeze. There's reps where it all clicks and it's beautiful, but there's reps where he'll miss his strikes. His foot technique can be a little bit confused. So there's room to grow there for Teran Arnold, but just overall so much to like. You love that inside out flexibility. I think on a high end range of outcomes, a player that I thought of that could be a decent comp for him is Chris Harris Jr., who was a guy for the Broncos that in base personnel would play outside corner for them, but then in nickel he would come in and play the slot and was like the best slot corner in the league for 7 years, made all-pro teams, like incredible playmaker on some of the best defenses of the decade. There's a lot of similarities in terms of the size, the way they move, how I think I'd use the guy with him and Teran Arnold. And some might hear, oh, you think he's a slot corner and think that's a criticism. Man, in today's game, I think it's a strength. Like the Baltimore Ravens slide Marlon Humphrey into the slot for a reason. The Rams took Jalen Ramsey and put him in the slot for a reason. There's some of that going on here, I think, with how I think you'd best use Teran Arnold. So I do like him. Slight pause, though, on his long speed and just penciling him in as this great first-round corner. I think it's at least something to have in the footnotes there. But let's get to my number 2 guy, someone that excites me but terrifies the shit out of me, and that's Nate Wiggins. I think if you could guarantee me he puts on about 7 pounds from what he was listed at the combine, which I think teams will ask of him, but it's iffy. And if you could guarantee me a full bill of health, I think Nate Wiggins is my number 1 corner. But those are big red flags. He's struggled to stay healthy at Clemson. He's been on and off the field, and then the second he ran his 40, he had to pull out of the event. Ended up recovering in the most part for his pro day, but the durability is a legitimate concern on Nate Wiggins, and that's why my low-end comp is someone that came out a couple of years ago, and Caleb Farley, who had much more serious medical concerns, but the similar type of beat where he's going to fall in the draft probably to the 20-ish range because of the medical concerns, but you take him knowing they don't make him like Nate Wiggins. Unbelievable combination of length and speed, and really it's not just the physical side of things. If you want that, go take Decamarion Richardson in the 3rd or 4th round. Nate Wiggins does have good skills for the position to pair with his elite athletic ability. Like really smart zone corner at Clemson, ran a lot of zone, a lot of off zone, but equally good in press coverage, rapid feet to stay in front of guys, good usage with his hands. He does have shorter arms relative to his height. It doesn't seem to impact him too much outside of his tackling ability and ability to kind of get his hands on the ball down the field, but it doesn't really hurt him in press. I think he's got a really nice balance in terms of off coverage, route squeeze. If a guy stops underneath, he'll snap onto him, but he's cautious enough and quick enough to protect against double moves, and certainly has the recovery speed where he can be a little bit more aggressive and not worry about it. I mean, this dude ran a 4.28 at the combine, and that speed shows on tape. Now, I'd rather he puts on 10 pounds and plays with 4.34 speed, but that's a different conversation. Again, I do think, minus the injury, this might be the best corner in the draft. Now, there's some weaknesses there. You'll see that C- grade on his ball skills. A little bit of what we talked about with like Kayn Carson going back to earlier in the video. When the ball's in the air, I do wish he would trust his body positioning a little bit more. I think it's something you can coach into him. He's still a young player. Again, he's missed some time as well. But just trust it a little bit more. Get that head around. Find the football. He gets a little bit grabby in phase down the field. If you want him to reach that high-end pro comp that I have on him in Darius Slay, you want him to be a little bit more consistent and more of a playmaker in those situations. And then the run defense. He's slender, and he has shorter arms. He's not going to be a great run defender, but he is very willing. And I think people are almost overly critical on who Nate Wiggins is as a run defender. I've seen plenty of highlight run stops from him, and I don't even really think it's an effort thing. I think it's a play strength thing, and it's something you'll live with when his coverage is as good as it is. I do think where you'd be a little bit more worried is the actual tackling ability. Like, I think he sees the run, he works around blocks, he flies to the ball, he's willing there, but his ability to finish is not ideal. And I think you see the play strength concerns. He'll make contact, but he'll just get brushed off against, more powerful ball carriers. But the arm length as well. Again, just very mediocre arm length for his height, 30.5 inches. So the ability to really wrap around and secure those tackles is worse than you'd like to see, and probably won't be a huge strength of his in the NFL. At the end of the day, a polarizing prospect, someone I would take in the first round, but with the understanding that this could be Andrew Booth out of Clemson. This could be Caleb Farley, where he just is not built to hold up in the NFL. And it's, like I said right away, like, that scares the shit out of me. Hope he can stay healthy, though. Really fun player. And I feel like I shit on his ball skills. That's just when he has his back turned. Like, when he's looking at the quarterback, he does have playmaking instincts, and when he makes something happen, he'll let you know about it. Like, he's a trash talker on that field. He's kind of got that Devon Witherspoon, Jair Alexander mentality to him that you love. If he gets beat, it's not going to get to his head. He's got a short memory. He's got the personality of an elite corner in the NFL and the physical tools of an elite corner in the NFL. So the sky is the limit for Nate Wiggins. Literally the highest potential grade of anybody we're talking about here today. But hard to pass on the floor of my number one corner. Really not too much of a debate for CB1 when you factor in the injury concerns for Wiggins. It's Quinan Mitchell. Wow. I don't know that he necessarily needed the pre-draft process that he did, where he had one of the better Senior Bowls, not just this year, but in recent years. Like, it's hard for a cornerback to dominate the Senior Bowl, period. But to dominate the way Quinan Mitchell did was eye-opening. And then he comes out and runs a 4.33. Like, we were thinking, okay, he's got good speed on tape, not really worried about it. Probably going to be like a 4.38, 4.39 guy. To be low 4.3s, 4.33, a 1.5, 110-yard split, great testing numbers beyond that. This is like all boxes checked for a guy whose tape is just sensational. You see a guy at Toledo, you want to see dominant tape. Well, you get it in Quinan Mitchell. Back-to-back years at Toledo allowed like less than 300 yards, 27 receptions, a reception percentage of about 40% over the last 2 years. Like, anything under 50%, like, reception percentage, where, like, when you're getting targeted, are you allowing a reception? Anything under 50% is phenomenal. He was at around 40% back-to-back years. So you got the kind of lockdown profile. The dude has 33 passes defended over the last 2 years, 6 picks, 27 pass breakups, no penalties last year. He's a great run defender, a consistent tackler. I just don't know literally what else do you want from Quinan Mitchell. Okay, they ran a lot of off-zone coverage at Toledo. When he ran man at Toledo, he looked good, but it was very few and far between, and against lower level of competition. All right, the dude goes to the Senior Bowl and had one of the best man-to-man weeks a corner has had down there in Mobile in 4 years. There's no reason, like, you see the athletic profile, you see his technique in press, his competitiveness, his play strength for the position where he's not bothered by contact. Like, don't really have any concerns that the press man profile is going to be there at the next level. You go to the tape and see the zone IQ, the route squeeze, like all of the things you look for from that type of corner. It's all there. The confidence to get his head around in phase, where that's a criticism on a guy like Nate Wiggins. It's not on Quinan Mitchell. You know, he's out there at the Senior Bowl getting his head around, picking balls off. Like, if you're really searching for weaknesses, I would say his arm length is just average relative to his good size. Certainly not enough to impact his game a whole lot at all, really. Number 2 would be like kind of the same thing we said about Andrew Phillips, where sometimes he's opening up his hips a little early or in the wrong direction. A very coachable thing, but some of his coverage losses did come when he would turn the wrong way from a technique standpoint and end up out of position. Again, I think very coachable. Level of competition and the fact that he didn't play a lot of press man coverage, we kind of debunked those things. So I think he's one of the best defensive players in this draft. He, to me, is like no-brainer CB1. If there was a team that needed a corner early, I think a top 10 pick would be totally reasonable. Like, I'm going to have the same grade, if not better, on Quinan Mitchell as I do on like Rome Odunze, who everybody keeps talking about. I think relative to their position group, Mitchell is right there, if not even a little better. So someone's going to get him in the 10 to 15 range and could be getting an all-pro type of corner. My pro comp for him is Marshawn Lattimore, who had one of the best rookie cornerback seasons ever and is still one of the best in the league when healthy. So that to me is Quinan Mitchell. If there's a weakness on him that I'm not seeing, please tell me, because I have yet to see it. And that's going to do it for today's cornerback video. A really fun position. I think this group in general, especially when you get into that 10 to 20 range, that, again, I have all these guys written up on my Patreon if you want to check out my opinions on other players in this draft. But this position group is such a scheme-dependent position group. I think we did a good job hitting on some of the players in the top 10 as well that are pretty scheme-specific. But it is a beauty in the eye of the beholder position for a lot of these guys. So you're going to see a very wide spectrum of rankings in this position group. But with that said, let me know your top 10 corners in this draft. Let me know the sleepers that you think maybe should have been in my top 10 list. I appreciate the comments. I appreciate you hitting that like button. Of course, subscribe so you don't miss any more draft content as we go here. Our next position group is going to be offensive tackles. So we've got that to look forward to. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you soon. Peace out.